Ukraine is left without military aid, the US will ban even the purchase of American weapons, Ukraine risks losing its air defense, and the Ukrainian military-industrial complex will not be enough. Will Europe be able to compensate for the lack of weapons, and how long will the equipment reserves last? Find out right now.
After the meeting between Donald Trump and Volodymyr Zelenskyy at the White House, military aid from the US to Ukraine has come under serious doubt. Its cessation could bring Russia closer to victory. This is mentioned in a Sunday publication by the American Institute for the Study of War.
Ukrainian forces, supported by significant US aid, are inflicting heavy losses on Russian forces, keeping them on the brink of success. This situation, combined with the serious problems that Russia will face in 2025, gives the United States a significant advantage in peace negotiations. The suspension of ongoing US military aid to Ukraine will prompt Russian President Vladimir Putin to continue raising his demands, and it will strengthen his belief that he can achieve complete victory through war.
Right now, the supplies of American weapons for the armed forces of Ukraine are ongoing. It continues under contracts signed during President Joe Biden's administration. And they will continue until the end of 2025. For at least 6 months, the armed forces of Ukraine can fight without any problems using old supplies. But what happens next if the US stops helping?
At the moment, the Ukrainian defense industry can meet the needs of Ukraine's defense forces at about 30%. It's precisely this factor. Unfortunately, the children of Yelesova and Piataya, who are being pressured by our strategic partners, clearly understand that the lack of external military technical assistance to Ukraine will be quite problematic.
Last year, the Ukrainian defense industry produced goods worth $9 billion. At the same time, the capabilities of the Ukrainian defense industry are at least twice as high.
Ukrainian enterprises were capable of producing defense products last year worth about $20 billion, which is twice as much.
Experts from Kiel University calculated that from 2022 to 2024, the European Union and Britain provided weapons worth 62 billion euros, while the US provided 64 billion euros. Last year, the Americans sent military equipment worth 20 billion euros. At first glance, Ukraine's European allies can easily compensate for the annual shortfall of 20 billion euros, which is just 1/1000th of the EU's GDP. But the real problem comes down to the physical availability of weapons in the warehouses.
If the United States doesn't want to sell weapons to Ukraine, it will be much more difficult, and especially in areas like air defense, this could become a problem. But in many areas, if you look at artillery, ammunition, drones, those are the areas where US assistance is helpful but not entirely critical. For example, Europe produces many more artillery shells than the United States. But of course, it's always useful to have more, especially when you're fighting someone like Russia.
Kiev's main efforts right now are focused on replacing a large part of American weaponry with its own capabilities. But the dependence on the US for air defense systems and missiles for them remains critical. First and foremost, we're talking about the Patriot air defense system, which can intercept ballistic and air-breathing targets.
Although Europe could theoretically match US spending levels, I don't see it being able to provide the full range of weapons needed. And in some critically important categories like missiles for air defense, a problem with volumes quickly arises.
If Ukraine doesn't have the means to fight and intercept the missiles that are terrorizing peaceful Ukrainian cities, it could lead to irreparable consequences. And Europe understands this. French President Emmanuel Macron announced a multi-billion-dollar military aid package from the EU, which will be announced on March 6th at the Ukraine and Europe Security Summit. Macron linked Ukraine's fate to the security of all of Europe.
If we allow Russia to capture Ukraine, the largest army in Europe with a vast amount of weapons will be at our borders.
In the next 6 months, there is no reason for Ukraine to worry. We have weapons. So, it's necessary to find a compromise with the US or negotiate an increase in funding from the EU. And if we have the money, we will be able to easily purchase the necessary air defense systems and missiles from across the ocean. For them,
Western media widely condemns Trump's policy, which portrays Ukraine as the aggressor in the 3-year war. Never before in the Oval Office has anyone been treated this way, not even towards the enemies of the US, let alone allies. And also the shocking statements from American officials. Stay tuned.
The global press and European leaders reacted sharply to the public diplomatic scandal between the presidents of the US and Ukraine, Donald Trump and Volodymyr Zelenskyy. In the Oval Office. According to journalists from the Financial Times, the Vice President, Niv Vazin, and President Trump were preparing for a quarrel with Zelenskyy in order to possibly put him in a weaker position during negotiations.
Over the past 2 weeks, Trump has done everything to undermine Zelenskyy, making early concessions to Moscow and portraying Ukraine as the aggressor in the 3-year war. From a publication by the Financial Times.
The New York Times described the meeting between Volodymyr Zelenskyy and Trump's team as a public confrontation, unlike any in recent history. According to this authoritative publication, Trump and Pence criticized Zelenskyy for allegedly not being grateful enough for U.S. support in the war against Russia and tried to force him to reach a peace agreement on any terms dictated by the Americans.
The president's verbal attack on Mr. Zelenskyy was a shocking display of anger and outrage towards the leader of a country that has been invaded by a larger power, intending to destroy it as an independent state. No other president in my memory has ever attacked a foreign leader who came to the Oval Office in front of the cameras in such an insulting manner, even towards an opponent of the United States, let alone a supposed ally. From a publication by the New York Times.
The New York Times also points out in its publications that the behavior of the U.S. president has called into question the reliability of the United States as an ally. A hostile meeting where Trump and Jay Divens literally berated Volodymyr Zelenskyy in public. So the situation in the Oval Office is described by the Wall Street Journal. Journalists compared this meeting to a bar fight where Trump and Jay Divens demanded respect and gratitude from Zelenskyy. According to Spiegel's author René Pfister, he poorly prepared the potential deal, and what's even worse, he created the impression that there is no clear distinction in this war between the aggressor, Russia, and the victim of that aggression, Ukraine.
Trump's foreign policy, based solely on issues of power, clearly shows the old world that there are no longer any guarantees or reliability in U.S. relations. The transatlantic alliance is dead. We live in a new geopolitical jungle ruled by people who believe only in the power of tanks and nuclear warheads. Trump may still be committed to NATO, but what is the worth of a person's word who called Zelenskyy a dictator just to push him into a deal that benefits himself? From a publication by Spiegel.
It doesn't matter what the attitude towards Zelenskyy is or what his rhetoric is. What matters is that Zelenskyy represents a country that has been attacked and which heroically defends itself every day. At the same time, not a word was said about Putin, and what happened in the Oval Office is simply impossible to describe in words. Such conclusions were made by the publication Bild. Many other German publications have also released similar materials.
They were talking loudly and rudely, sometimes raising their index finger. They interrupted the speech of the president of Ukraine and mocked him and his people in front of the cameras. It was painful to watch, not only because it once again significantly darkened Ukraine's prospects of defending itself against the Russian attack, but also due to the disrespect with which the U.S. president and his vice president treated the representative of the country that was under attack. From the publication Zeit Online.
In a Guardian article, the top diplomat died on live television. The meeting at the White House was called, I quote, one of the global catastrophe conferences in modern history.
When Trump got into a spat with Volodymyr Zelenskyy, a horrified Europe watched as the order after World War II was restored. It's collapsing right before her eyes. Never before has a U.S. president mocked and scolded an opponent, let alone an ally, in such a public manner. Zelenskyy found himself trapped in a snare set by Trump and his cunning vice president, J. Vance. He was supposed to sit back and endure the beatings, but he refused. From a publication by The Guardian.
During the meeting, Trump and Vice President Jay Divens accused Zelenskyy of being allegedly insufficiently grateful for the U.S. support for Ukraine in its fight against Russian aggression. CNN calculated that since 2022, Zelenskyy has thanked the U.S. officials and Americans at least 33 times. The publication provided a list of all of Zelenskyy's public statements in English, where he expressed words of gratitude to the United States.